Hey everybody, this is Pete A. Turner, the executive producer and host of the Break It Down show. Today's guest is Rob Greenlee, Vice President of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn. Libsyn, of course, is our syndicator here at the Break It Down show, and we're always proud to do things with them. By the way, happy birthday to Libsyn. If you're interested in starting a podcast, we actually have an affiliate code that will get you your first full month free. That code, get this, is Pete. Just write the word Pete in there and you'll get your first full month free. Let me explain this a little better. If you sign up on December 2nd, you wouldn't pay for your first month until February. Back to Rob. Rob is a Hall of Fame podcaster. He's been doing this since before you even heard of a podcast. He's been at it since the 90s, developing content, new shows. That's why he's the right guy for VP of Content and Partnership at Libsyn. You're going to love what he has in terms of his vision on where the market's been, where it's going, what podcasts are all about. If you ever considered starting a podcast, this is a great one to start with because people like Rob and myself who help people produce shows, this is the insight you're going to need to get going fast. Okay, a couple of business things. Look, there's a lot of podcasts out there. If you like what we're doing, here's what helps the most. Participate. Whether you share or talk to me on Twitter, like, subscribe, rate, review, all of these things. This is how other people find us and they can discover the show as well. We've got so many great things on the horizon. I'm really excited for you guys to join us on journeys that we're going to take through a variety of topics. You know how I like to do it. I like to get it wide. We're going to get into space, academics, all kinds of things. So again, if you want to participate, that's the best way to help us. The other thing I'm going to ask of you, and this is from the heart, and you guys that know me or know I'm genuine about this. I am a big advocate for Save the Brave because of their charter of helping veterans stay alive through PTSD. I have PTSD. It's one of the things where if we can get these people who are struggling before they're at the end of the bridge or at the end of their rope, we really have a chance to turn their lives around and get good things going. Here's how you can help. Go to savethebrave.org, click on donate, and enter a monthly number that you can afford. Nothing crazy. Would you buy me lunch once a month? Okay, great. $25. Do that every month, and you will really be doing something significant. If you want to do more, by all means, let me know. In the meantime, enough of me badgering you. Let's talk to Rob. I know you're going to love it. By the way, this show is recorded on my bulletproof podcast rig, a Zoom H6, and an SM35 Shure headset microphone. Get that headset. I'm not paid to say this. I'm telling you these things because I truly believe in it. This is the way to go. I recorded this at a noisy Starbucks. Yes, there's a tiny bit of background noise, but nothing like what was evident. So, bulletproof podcast rig, H6, SM35 headsets, and you're on the way. Thanks, everybody. Now enjoy Rob Greenlee.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Rob Greenlee from Libsyn on the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, this is pretty neat. So Rob is a Hall of Fame podcaster. Of course, you've done a lot of other things. You've been a mayor, and I'm curious to see what we have happened in this conversation. Just for the audience's edification, I was at the Save the Brave golf tournament today and got caught up a little bit with Scott and the boys, and so I'm recording this on the road at a Starbucks. So it's not ideal, but we're going to get this in, and I'm excited to talk to Rob. He's a busy dude, and I really appreciate your time, Rob, for coming on the show.
Well, it's great to be here, Pete. Yeah.
Gosh, is it right that you've been podcasting or in that world since the late 90s?
Well, I started on the radio back in 1999. So then I started making my show available off of my website back in probably 2000 as just a straight download off my website. And so then I started podcasting in September of 2004. So is when it actually happened. And it really wasn't a big deal to me at the time. It was just adding a little enclosure tag to my blog feed off my brand new website and blog that I had, that I was launching right at the same time.
So in 99, it was more of a radio thing that
right.
branched in. And I listened to one of your podcasts you did with somebody else where you were talking about it cost $20,000 to basically set up your home studio. That's not the case now. Like the podcasting rig that I advocate is about, let's say it's $1,000 all in to get you something that's
Right.
professional. You might need some specific things for your own, your own specific needs, but a Zoom 6 and some, in this case, Shure headsets, and you're on the road.
Right. Yeah, I mean, at the time I was trying to do a full radio show, so I had a condenser microphone, and I had about 3 of them that I was using.
Yeah.
And so I had to sound buffer the bedroom that I was using, and I had a lot of kind of more music recording equipment. So I had a phone hybrid system, and then a few years into it, I set up a computer where I could bring in a Skype call. So it was really kind of trying to set up a pretty professional production studio that sounded outstanding, and the show did sound outstanding because I was using really, really high-end microphones. And one of the reasons that I did that back then was because I had to crunch the audio file down to a very low playback bit rate of only like 16K or 32K, as opposed to what we see today in podcasting, where most of the MP3 files are played back at either 64, 98, or 128K. So you can see it was kind of a quality in, quality out type of situation. And that's why I had a higher end kind of studio. But now things have changed.
Yeah, I think a couple things have evolved from that too. Like radio was our norm, and we trained our ear for a certain standard. And a lot of my audio engineer friends get a little bound up by the quality of a given show or whatever. But now podcasts can be a little more, I don't want to say raw, 'cause that's not fair, but the quality of the production doesn't have to inhibit the actual production itself. You want to sound great, but you don't got to spend $20,000 getting there. Hey, this is P.J. Turner from the Break It Down Show, checking in real quick to ask you this. John, Scott, and I all support Save the Brave with our time, our location, our effort, and our money. Each month we give a small amount. Do the same with us. Go to savethebrave.org, click on the Donate tab, pick an amount that you want to come out each month, and they will handle all the rest. I stand behind these folks. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show. The quality of the production doesn't have to inhibit the actual production itself. You want to sound great, but you don't got to spend $20,000 getting there.
Yeah, I don't think you do either. I think the mobile phone type of devices, these portable digital recorders that were around back then, or weren't around back then, but they are now, that you can use to record anywhere, and it sounds terrific. So yeah, things have changed a lot.
Yeah, I'll say. I mean, even in the time, so I've been at this for 5 years and put up episode 564 today. So quite a while with a lot of experience.
Oh, great. Wow.
And it took a while. Yeah. We used to use drum mics with table stands, and they sounded great, but just for me, portability, mobility, reliability, and quality, probably in that order, but not a lot of separation between each of those things. And you can really get on the road and make some incredible things and outperform a lot of people. But that's only one way to do a podcast. What shocks me are just the creativity that's been unlocked by this, and I don't want to make light of radio and their significant presence, but they struggle with the openness of what a podcast can be. Like it really doesn't have to be long form interviews. It can be scripted drama. It can be anything. What are you seeing out there that excites you?
Oh, I just see the expansion into genres and creativity that continues to expand the market. And I'm still hopeful that we'll see a strong expansion into fictional podcasts, which is a little bit struggling right now because the whole kind of true crime reality-based genre is so strong, and people are really fixated on that right now. But I think that that's kind of like the ultimate solution here to some degree to expand the audience for podcasting is to get into fictional content, because then you're basically unlimited in what you can do around content.
You don't need gigantic budgets to put something together. You really can say, what if we did The Martian, but with this reality twist, and a whole new show could come out of that?
Yeah, that's right. I think that the options for creativity and, not unlike what we see in TV and film today, there's just a plethora of optional things that can be done, where reality tends to be a little more fixed in what's possible because of, it's based on reality, right? So you can't go into areas as complex, though I would say probably it's to say that a lot of reality stories are probably as weird as fictional stories. So,
Well, that's the saying, right? Truth is stranger
yeah,
than
right,
fiction.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
That it's So I live in Southern California, and one of the things I've been advocating for is any major program, like if there's going to be a fan podcast, why isn't ABC creating its own podcast? Like why are they giving that market share away? And look, I want people to create in their garage and in their house and everything, but I'm trying to get these big corporations to see this. I don't know if you listened to the Chernobyl podcast that accompanied the HBO limited series, but that's exactly where I think the big production houses need to be, because again, for a fraction, the cost of a commercial, less than that, you can put together compelling content on top of the big content you've already got.
Right. There's huge opportunity out there for the really professional producers to get into the space too, but there's also a huge opportunity for independent producers to come in and do the same thing, because you don't have to have huge budgets to do this stuff. Right. And I think a lot of those big studios are going to come into it and think that they need to have huge budgets, and they're going to have a hard time making the economics of it work.
Yeah.
Where an independent producer is going to come in and look at it and say, how can I be as efficient in the production of this as possible and still have a compelling piece of content? And I think that's going to be where Hollywood gets challenged on this. Mm-hmm. And I think it's happening to film and TV right now, where the production costs are being pushed down lower and lower so they can make the economics of digital distribution actually work.
Yeah. I think about like what Deadpool would be like if they gave Deadpool his own quote unquote, like Between the Ferns podcast, right? Like,
right.
Even just between movies, you could have like you're smiling. Everybody can't see that, but you already get it. Like what you could unlock with that. And then there's so many writers in Hollywood, not even 10% of the scripts get made into something. Here you have something that you could just write indefinitely, Yeah.
I mean, it still needs to be funded, and it still needs to be supported by a quality team. It gets back to, is it being produced in an economical way that's utilizing shortcuts that have been learned through many, many years of producing podcasts? Or are these big studios just going to throw a bunch of money at it and it's going to fail? Yeah.
So one of the questions I get a lot, so I do a lot of counseling on people when they want to have a podcast. And I say counseling because you got to be crazy to take on this much work for their
right
for the revenue you're going to drive in. Some of the common things are, what kind of a studio do I need? And I'm like, you don't need, I mean, obviously Starbucks on a Friday afternoon is not ideal, but it is a solution that will work. But I go to people's homes all the time and just sit down and bam, I'm in their place, record. I was at Greg Hurwitz, who's a world-class writer. He's written comic books, screenplays, books, and I'm in his house recording something. It's just remarkable to be able to do that. You don't have to have that studio presence. And the other thing they always say is, how do you monetize? With commercials? And I feel like that's part of the market hurdle to get over. Is it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be commercials. It doesn't have to be in a studio. Like, you really have to open your mind to what's possible out there.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who has seen a lot of evolution, where do you see the growth in podcasts in terms of how do you get funded? Where else can the money come from? Because look, if you don't have 1 million followers, yeah, you can maybe pull some money in on Patreon, but no matter what, you have to have an audience, like, to drive revenue.
Right. I mean, over time, we're seeing more kind of startup investment organizations looking at podcasting as a place to do some micro investments and things like that. There's I'm drawing a blank on the name. I think it's called Pod Fund. That's been started to fund the creative development of podcasts. So I think we're starting to see that happen now, as you start to see, to some degree, the professionalization of this medium kind of expand. And there is going to be investors and people that are willing to take some risk on quality content and quality writing as well, and quality acting, that's gonna keep expanding this space. And I still think, and I always have to say this, but I still think that the indie producers are going to be where the core of the energy and the life of this medium is going to be. So power to those indie producers that are willing to get in there and take some risk and do something unique and groundbreaking out there.
You're a Hall of Famer. When you say you think the indie space is where it's at, I have to follow up with Why? Describe what you're seeing.
Well, because it's around passion. It's around passion and focus. And you can't underestimate the power of a creative and talented producer that has a great idea and is willing to put in the hard work and sweat that it takes to get it done. Because that's the backbone of this medium. That's what built podcasting, was that energy and that passion. A lot of the big media companies just don't have that because it doesn't have the same kind of energy behind it. And sometimes those fall flat. And so I'm really optimistic about the future of indie producers that maybe are partnered with studios, but maybe it's not necessarily coming out of those studios, if you know what I mean.
And the limited series having growth and success in terms of the video format, you really have the ability to take a lot more of these types of subjects that get turned into mini-series, limited series. You can really explore those topics again on a budget. You can build an audience for true crime is a great example. Again, you can find a story about true crime that just has never really been able to be told, or tell it in a different way, combine it with other true crime stories, and just make something else out of it, again, for a fraction of the budget. But like you said, that passion has to be there. How does one learn if they have the look, infatuation and passion might overlap, but at some point hard work has to come in and be trump over everything.
Well, it is. I mean, and that passion and desire to succeed is going to separate people from the pack. I mean, there is nothing like putting in the time and the effort. And success doesn't happen overnight. It happens from consistent, long-term, hard work to learn the craft and to figure out ways to be as efficient in the production as you can by being able to hire one actor to do 2 or 3 different roles, or to have that kind of cheap Foley solution that can create a sound effect that these big studios spend $10,000 on producing, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, how can you hack the system in order to get the best results for the cheapest price? So when you take this out and you run an ad campaign against it, you can actually make some money from it versus losing money.
The other thing I guess you could say too is you have the ability to be nimble enough to say this Foley service that we're going to use is, let's say it's $500, whatever it is, right?
Right.
That's our budget. It's not the best Foley, but we can write to be more campy and be more like the old Batman TV show where camp is part of it. So you can replace budget with camp, and get away with it potentially if you're clever.
Oh, I think so too. And I think that's bringing kind of a unique angle to the medium that the medium needs, is taking it to another level and saying, what can we do that's different than what's traditionally done, but do it in a way that's interesting as well, right? So,
yeah, that's true. That magic that happens through passion and the ingenuity with the story, and how to tell this story in a way that I'm working on a bunch of different projects that are in pre-production. They're all trying to fight to get into production, just like the movie houses. But when I'm talking to these writers, I'm like, I need a story with 3 to 6 characters, maybe 3 tertiary characters, but that's it. Super lean. Get me something that's, compelling within that, and just start cranking those things out, and not only put out product, but learn, like you said, create elegance, create efficiency.
And I think that's key. And then finding talent that is capable of doing what's necessary here. I think it's going to require a whole nother kind of view on talent as well. And talent that's flexible, talent that has multiple skills. Those people will rise to the top here based on their ability to play different roles and play different characters and to play different voices.
A few minutes ago, you were talking about the hard work aspect of what we have to do. Again, you've been in this game for a long time. What's realistic? I mean, people want to come in, and we know that within a month, you don't have an established show that's just raging. You might flash, but I mean, how many, 13 episodes is already the bar. If you can get past that, you've got a legitimate show. But to still be pulling audience at episode 200, 300, or season 7, whatever it's going to be, what is your sense? If you're consistently getting better, when should you start to see some KPIs? Not necessarily money, because that's, there's a lot of things to achieve before money, but what's your sense for the hard work and the time and how those things align?
Well, I think it's really starting any business. Sometimes you're going to have a hit, sometimes you're not. and it's all in the magic of the sauce, right? It's sometimes there's going to be things that just come together, like the talent that you recruit. There's just a chemistry to it, and it just works. And the same thing happens with television. Same thing happens with movies. If the script is good, if the talent is good, and it's just a magic thing that happens in programs that become hits. Yeah. And sometimes you have to just iterate, and then there's a hit. But you may have moderate success up to the time, but you have to earn that process in order to get to that hit.
What are some things in terms of gathering out? Because look, there's hundreds of thousands of podcasts, right? And I like to talk about ringing the bell. Like, you have to get great at ringing the bell because everybody's ringing their bell. Then you got to find a way to ring your bell in a unique way so you can stand out in the din. How do you grab audience? Like, what's a key factor that podcasters may not, or potential podcasters may not realize that's out there to gather attention and just when everybody's out there shouting in the marketplace? Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it. How do you grab audience? Like, what's a key factor that podcasters may not, or potential podcasters may not realize that's out there to gather attention and just when everybody's out there shouting in the marketplace?
Well, you have to be able to take people on an emotional roller coaster. So I think that's the key to making connections with humans is that you need to play at both ends of their emotions. You need to play a joy and you need to play with sorrow. And I think stories that take listeners or viewers on a journey of those emotions at the extremes and then will gather loyalty and following. It's not easy to do, but it's a well-known process.
Yeah. So that you're speaking my language. I was a combat spy, and I focused on affect over effect. If I could create an emotional response to my output, then I was in the game. I may not get the response I want, but I can work from there. If nothing happens, you're just sort of like, I better find a new emotion, you know?
Right. There's got to be some emotion there, else you're kind of in trouble, right?
Right. And you can do the Howard Stern thing where half of the people love you, half of the people hate you. Either way, you got two halves of the pie. You know?
Exactly. If they hate you and they're still listening, hey, that's a win.
Yeah, that is a win. What do you listen to? I know I barely have time to listen. I mean, we put 5 shows out a week here. So you know what I listen to. I listen to my own stuff a lot. But when you have time, what do you sample?
I just sample all sorts of different kinds of podcasts all the time. I don't really connect with one on a regular basis because I just don't have time to do that. So I'm always trying to find and experience different types of podcasts at all times. And then I also work with a lot of podcasters. So I listen to their shows to help them, advise them on how they can improve or change things or get more focused and create those emotions or those type of things. So I listen to a lot of different kinds of shows. So I can't really, as far as my personal preferences, I kind of like relationship shows. I like tech shows. I like politics programs as well. So those are my personal passions, but I also know that those aren't necessarily the genres that everybody likes to listen to.
Right. Yeah. So when you're advising people, I know personally for me, one of my pieces of advice is to slow down in several different ways. Slow down your speech so you can self-edit. If you're talking so fast that you don't have time to even think ahead of your thoughts, you'll and on all these other things. But also just to allow the conversation to breathe, to learn to shut up. I'm really big on the Vin Scully School of Broadcasting. If it takes 2 minutes of shutting up to communicate that emotion, then by all means, go slower until you know you're too slow, and then twist it up one notch and slowly speed up until you find your cadence that makes sense for you.
Yeah.
That's go-to advice I give everybody. Slow down, figure out what's too slow, build up from there.
Well, also a lot of people listen at 1.5 speed too. So or 2 times speed. They're called podfasters.
Yes.
But I think having cadence in your voice that fluctuates up and down, but is yet still consistent in its volume, I think is key. So you need to sound interesting. And I think a boring monotone voice is not not always very, very helpful. And it needs to have a little bit of a humor twist to it too at all times. But it can also have, some sorrow in there. It can have some tough moments as well. So, it's all about driving that emotion. And I think your tone of your voice and your cadence and how you communicate also tells the audience how personable you are with them. Now, granted, if you're doing fictional stuff, you're playing a character, so it's even more complicated.
Oh, yeah.
But if you're just playing yourself, that's where those actors earn their money, is being able to translate what the script says into emotion and then make it magic.
One of the guys from my hometown, he's got a really successful scripted drama show called Rose Drive, and he works for Hans Zimmer in the music department. So, he knows about sound, and sound is a character in his story, because it's audio. So you have to show them the book with some kind of sound and create a lot of emotions, tension. He's a master at tension and uncertainty that gives the actors room to do another emotion instead of just that. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. And more music is going to be available to podcasters as well. There's an effort now with the Sound Exchange folks to offer a music license for podcasts.
Yeah.
So that's coming here in 2020, where you'll be able to go in and license some significant label music to be able to use in your show to create those drama moments. Because a lot of TV shows and movies use music as an effect to create emotion and drama as well. And that is critical to the production of a drama podcast.
For sure. And I love hearing that there's progress on that, because one of the shows, because I don't have time to build distinct shows, I just put them under the Break It Down Show label. We have a thing called album fights, where we put two albums together in the ring in a compare and contrast format. And, so it's the Beatles. And every time I put them up, even if I'm just using a sample, just to put the frame of, not to lean on the song to sell it, but just like, this is the song we're talking about, and then it's in there underneath. I always get hit for, not, and I'm within fair use. I've looked it up. I've talked to lawyers, but that doesn't mean the robot doesn't, hit on it. And now I've got to go through a whole process, which is not an elegant solution to music. I should just be able to, pay a small fee for using the music in a way that uplifts the artist and everything else.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So what do you do for Libsyn? You're working over there. You're this icon in the podcast world. How do you help out artists?
My role here is to live in two worlds, to work in the area of partnerships and working with external companies and media companies to establish, either services or content relationships with the Libsyn platform. And then on the other side, I work with podcasters from a content perspective. So my two roles are really content and partnerships.
Gotcha.
And they cross over a lot with each other. It's working with, whether it be like Amazon, or working with Pandora, or working with these listening platforms. So I work over there as well. But then I work with podcasters, and I work with networks and media companies as they plan and strategize the distribution of their programs. I tend to work a little bit more on the content side with indie producers, because oftentimes they're looking for help or suggestions or somebody that can listen to what they've done and give them feedback. I do that probably more for indie producers than I do for the big media companies that typically have their own processes for doing those kinds of things. So with the larger media companies, I tend to just help them with their distribution and their monetization strategies. And then with the indie producers, I get a little deeper into the content.
So I've got some unique content. What's your advice for me? Just, in simple terms, just want to illustrate for the audience, like the kind of things you might do. I've got a number of interviews with folks in the prison system, whether they've been incarcerated or they've gotten out, or people work in the nonprofit side, or even on the judicial, the penal system side of it. And they're kind of describing this problem. It's easy to say the prison industrial complex, but no shit, there's an actual system. And to understand what the pieces are in it, is important, because it turns out we don't throw people away. Most everybody that does a crime, including murder one, most of them get out at some point. So what condition do we want them to get out in? That's sort of the premise of the show. But what I don't have is a lot of connections to folks that might take this project that I'm working on and turn it into something. So what does an indie guy like me do? I've got an established show, a lot of attention for it, but this is a separate thing.
So you're looking to convert what you're doing in the podcast into a different type of medium? Is that what you're?
No, I'm looking to, when I release this, hopefully in the fall here, to give it some legs. Because if I just put it out on my channel, it's such a unique thing, and it's so powerful with these guys telling these stories.
Right.
I want to make sure it gets legs that I can't give it.
Well, I think it does take kind of some PR, and it takes also looking at the audience that you have right now with the program and try and enable that audience to share the program. So what we're seeing in the data when we try different scenarios is that when the audience shares your show, shows tend to grow. When you, the producer, share your show, like on social media and stuff, you typically don't see a big lift.
Yeah.
So setting up a program or a process or asking your audience to share the program, if they're passionate of the show, with their friends that could have a common interest in the program, that has proven to be a strategy that actually will grow shows. Now, granted, you have to produce a show that inspires people to want to share it, right?
Right.
So there is a tight relationship between the production and basically giving your audience the tools that it needs to share the show themselves.
All of us podcasters have more show ideas than we have time to do. What's yours?
I'm actually working on a new podcast right now. It's kind of about the relationships that exist between podcast hosts and listeners. The premise behind the whole program is to dive into those topic areas and really pull apart the psychological motivations of audiences and hosts, and just kind of draw some clarity and examples, because I believe if you look at the future of the medium, that relationship between the host and the audience is the key to the growth of the medium.
Oh, I love it. I mean, just in general, that's that affect over effect again, right? Like, I never call the people that listen to my show the fans, and I typically don't call them the audience because they're my friends. Even if I don't meet them personally, these people, and you know how it is. Like, I look at my numbers and I'm like, Israel, how in the world do I have an audience in Israel? How do I have a guy in Uzbekistan who listens every month? Is it an expat? I wish that guy would talk to me, right? So these growth around the world, and what I figure is these are other Pete's. They're people that like what I like. They're fascinated what I'm fascinated by, and they love the questions and answers that come out of the show. So how do you
build those friendships and those bonds?
Yes.
I mean, I think that's the key is looking at your audience as an individual, not as a group, number one.
Yeah.
And then number two, looking at that audience and saying, well, how can I better make a personal connection with that audience or with that one listener, right? Maybe you have 10,000 listeners, but when you deliver a message to them, it needs to be delivered to them, just to them.
Yeah.
So when you talk about stuff in your show and you talk about your audience, you're talking about you, not we, right? It's the orientation of the individual listener, because they're listening in your inner ear. It doesn't get any more personal than that. And this is not a group listening medium. So it's inappropriate to mention group references. Now, radio and broadcasting have been doing this for years, and it's even a mistake for them. When they talk about audiences, they talk about broadcasting, right?
Yeah.
This is not broadcasting. This is individual podcasts, right? So it's a very personal medium, and if you treat your audience like that, they will more likely share. I mean, just think of them as your friend. What would your friend do for you, right? If they're bonded to you, they would tell another friend about how great you are. They would make recommendations to you. They would do all sorts of things to support you. That's what you want to create in a podcast.
I love it. That's such great counsel. One of the things that I've always loathed about radio, and again, God bless those guys, they do great work, but they neck down your choices. So every town has a morning show with here's Chuck Bucket, or whatever, and it's like I'm forced to listen to some form of this, on the radio. And also I come to like the guy, oh, there's Rob on Rob in the Mornings. I love Rob in the Morning. And all of a sudden Rob's contract doesn't get renewed, and poof, like Rob never existed. And I'm like, it's such a betrayal.
What the heck, right? Yeah.
I just can't stand it, man. Well, and that's why I don't listen to radio anymore. I'd rather, listen to someone who, like I said, or like you were saying, that I have a connection with that represents who I am. And I can either learn something from them or in some way get value out of that experience of listening.
Right. No, I agree. That's the key takeaway from this. And though that may be a little harder to do with a fictional drama podcast, but most of this medium is around hosts and co-hosts.
Yeah.
And that's where the audience comes in. I think if you're doing a fictional drama program or a true crime, I think it's a little bit of a different marketing challenge.
Yeah,
I think it's more right. But it's the same thing. You still want to inspire your audience to share it with their friends.
I've got a podcast that I produce for a friend that's a national travel magazine, but they're trying to keep the brand fresh, and why not podcasting? Right? There's plenty of travel podcasts out there. And what I've discovered is that chefs are like dream machines. You get chefs and I didn't know this going into this, like you're drawn to them, but when they start talking about where they like to go and explore and eat and what they're passionate about, that passion comes right across.
Mm-hmm.
People always ask me, like, what's your favorite show? And I'm like, it's the next one, because they're all so wonderful. Which guest do you not get enough of? Either like specific person or type of guest where you're just like, I just always need more PhDs or whatever it is. What do you personally not get enough of?
That's a pretty complicated question because I think it includes a lot of variables of types of people and types of situations. I think that the people that can tell a story and to just do the same thing that we've been talking about here, inspire some emotions, be funny, be serious, be a little on the sad side, share something that's relatively dramatic. I think guests that are able to tell stories when they're being talked to by a host, I think is important. And I also think that hosts are equally important in this storytelling process. They need to share stories that have context that are related to the guest as best they can. Now, sometimes that's just not possible, but I think it's the conversation. It's the host listening to the guest and digging in and finding those little edges and exploiting them. Just dive in and push those buttons. I think a guy like Joe Rogan and Mark Maron are terrific at listening to their guests and pulling out things that they say and teasing them and also making fun of them and holding them accountable too. I think are all part of that creating emotions.
Yeah.
And because it can be shocking to that guest that Mark Maron asked me that or told me that or stood up to me like that. And the audience goes, wow, Mark's not pulling any punches.
Yeah.
So those are the type of things, trying to be as honest and authentic as you can, but also be, exposing what's right there. But you have to listen to catch it.
I like to use listen for. I listen for things as a host, right? And when I was being a spy in Afghanistan and Iraq, I'm talking to people, I'm listening for certain things, and then, like you said, then I go in and I crack that particular topic open, and I validate, and I'm looking to challenge things. And on my show all the time, I'll say, listen, for everybody who's listening's benefit, I have to ask you this obvious but fair question, and I'm positive you can take it. So here it is, so I kind of tee it up, but I do come at him and I say, like I have to ask this. It's not my question. Everybody behind me wants me to ask this question.
Right, Exactly. What's the obvious question that's just sitting out there that you need to ask?
Right, yeah. Right. Absolutely. Hey, so it's Friday, and I don't want to keep you too long because I know you got things you want to do besides talk to old Pedro here. But I do have one more question.
Sure.
Getting a podcast up and off the ground and to a level where you're like, I am a podcast producer. Is that harder, or being a mayor? What's harder?
I wouldn't say that it's impossible or too hard to actually get a podcast up and running. I just think it takes you thinking about what your goals are and what you want to accomplish and what lights your fire every day.
Yeah.
What is the thing that you are going to look forward to getting up in the morning and sharing with others? What's your passion? What are you trying to do with your life? And this podcast will help you get there. So I think that's the key thing that you need to think about when you start a podcast is just get clear, you're going to change what you're going to do with your podcast from episode 1 to episode 10.
Yeah.
It's going to change, right? It's just go into it knowing, but you got to start somewhere. So set some goals for yourself, get focused on what you're trying to do, think creatively about the process, and can you sustain the content that you're putting out there that you're going to do? Because podcasting is a marathon run. It's not a sprint. Now, there are a lot of people that are doing seasons now that tend to make it a sprint, but those shows tend to, I hate to say, but they don't gather audience. Because if you're doing a series, let's say that's 10 episodes, and then you stop and you wait 3 months before you start doing it again, guess what? You've lost your audience. So it depends on what kind of show that you want to produce and what your expectations are on. If you're trying to build an advertising model, you need to be consistent, and you need to produce content that drives value to you primarily as the host and your audience. So, keep that in mind. You're doing, most podcasters do the show for themselves, not for their audience. The audience is an important participant, but it's not the core driver. Because if you are doing it for your audience primarily, you're not going to sustain it. It's not going to be something that you do in the long run.
I want to say two of the things you said again, and I totally agree. That's why I want to highlight these things. Anybody listening, it's not what you want to create, it's what you can create each time. So you can get in the gym. This is it's like bodybuilding. You have to be in the gym every day. You're constantly working on another part of your body. What can you do each day? Not what's the dream. That is so true. And this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And you have to want to do this all the time. So not only do you have to go to the gym every day, you have to like going to the gym every day.
Right. It's gotta make you excited, because that's going to come across in your podcast. And people like to follow people that have passion.
Yes.
I mean, look at a guy like Gary Vaynerchuk. He's kind of a Debbie Downer kind of a guy, but boy, he's got so much passion for what he's talking about. Right.
For sure. I love when people say, I can't stand listening to my voice. I'm like, well, if you're not over it, why are we over it? You've got to, that's a small hurdle. That's just called repetition. Get out there and beat yourself in the head with your voice so much that you just it doesn't bother you, because there's way bigger problems than that,
No, and whatever voice you have is going to work.
Yeah, totally.
It's more about how you present yourself is far more important.
Well, listen, you're a champ, man. I really appreciate you coming on. I hope I can convince you to do it again. And if we're ever in the same building at some time, I'd love to get a chance to shake your hand. And man, just thank you for being a trailblazer, brother. I mean, from all of us out here, there's a lot of us doing things that are inspired partly by your work, either directly or indirectly. Well, we all owe you a thanks. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you, Pete, for having me on your program. I wish you the most luck, too. And please stay in touch.